Hello, everyone, and welcome to Archaeological. Today is going to be the second video I'm doing in honor of Native American Heritage Month. The subject of today's video is the Middle Woodland Period in Georgia and the Southeastern United States. All right, so right off the bat, as I always like to point out, whenever those of us in the modern world hear terms for countries, provinces, or geographic regions, such as, say, China, the UK, the United States, or, you know, for example, the Southeastern United States, we tend to think of them as we know them now, at least in terms of political boundaries. Now, obviously, for example, the Southeastern United States has always been the southeastern part of North America. But in terms of its geographic boundaries, such as Georgia, my home state, or the other states within the Southeast, such as Florida, Louisiana, Alabama, etc., it does not always look this way. Now, of course, it is not an incorrect view to think of this region as it looks now on this map. After all, it has looked this way uh, for 100, 150-ish years or so. So obviously, there's no one alive who knows it any other way. But that's not the whole picture. This uh, region only took on its political boundaries. The Southeast only took on its political boundaries after a long series of events, processes, and catalysts. So, in order to understand and get a better look at the bigger picture of how the Southeast and my home state of Georgia took on their current political boundaries, uh, and in order to get a better look at the history of the Southeast as a whole, we need to go back just a little bit in time. Starting with first the Ohio Hopewell culture, which lasted, had a cultural height between 100 BCE and 500 CE. And I'm starting with the Ohio Hopewell culture first, um, because the Ohio Hopewell culture and the Hopewell mounds, which are seen here, are one of the most known and most ubiquitous parts of the Middle Woodland period. In fact, as I will talk about a little bit later in this video, um, the Hopewell uh, culture in Ohio was sort of the geographic political center, if you will, or cultural center of the Middle Woodland Eastern Woodlands. Uh, and is the name is already talked about. It is located in Ohio, right around here, just north of, and people from Ohio, if I butcher this, I'm sorry, Chillicothe, just a little bit northwest of Chillicothe, Ohio. Uh, and then another thing that needs to be pointed out, the thing that the Ohio Hopewell culture is most well known for is a phenomenon known as the Hopewell Interaction Sphere, which I will talk about in a little bit more detail in the video. But broadly, the Hopewell Interaction Sphere was this network of trade and cultural interaction that was centered around the Ohio Hopewell, but spread around basically all of the eastern woodlands, as far south as the Swift Creek and the Weedon Island cultures, Swift Creek culture here in Georgia, and the Weedon Island culture here in Florida, and as far north as the Laurel Complex and the Point Peninsula cultures. All right, now we're going to move on to the broader subject of this video, the Middle Woodland period, which roughly lasted between 300 BCE and 500 CE. Now, the reason I say roughly is because there are some archaeological sites where the Middle Woodland period appears to have lasted a little longer, even as late as 700 CE. But generally, the archaeological evidence points to the Middle Woodland period ending around 500 CE, give or take. So during this period of time, within the southeastern United States, and of course within Georgia, the population would begin to increase, leading to increased sedentism and the development of more settlements, more permanent settlements, if you will. And you can see here on this map sort of the distribution of those permanent or at the very least semi-permanent Middle Woodland settlements throughout Georgia. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of them. They're denoted by the red dots. So real quick, we're going to take a look at what Middle Woodland period society looked like. So for one thing, Middle Woodland society was largely egalitarian, though evidence suggests some families, as well as so-called big men and big women, may have gained some form of status based on personal ability and their influence over others that allowed them to gain wealth and assert control over trade routes, public ceremonies, and mound construction. Settlements are broadly, the settlement types during the Middle Woodland period are broadly divided between homesteads of one to a few households, hamlets made up of several households or homesteads, and larger villages that are often, but not always, ceremonial centers. Furthermore, some homesteads would specialize in specific types of craft production, such as the manufacture of lithic, or i.e. stone tools, types of pottery, or ceremonial objects. Many of these settlements, but not all, were located in resource-rich floodplains, boundary areas, along drainage divides, or along smaller river or other tributaries. Between summer and fall, these areas would maintain, and in many cases to this day, still maintain a high abundance of plant resources, such as hickory nuts and acorns, which would be gathered by Middle Woodland communities. Also, these plant resources would draw in, and again, even in many cases to this day, continue to draw in large numbers of deer and other animals to hunt, while rivers would maintain large numbers of fish to harvest. And in many cases, but not always, many river systems still maintain large numbers of these fish. Furthermore, these areas would be expertly managed with controlled burns to control to promote and control the growth of desired food resources. These tactics are broadly referred to by archaeologists such as Joseph Caldwell, who is the first one to sort of coin this hypothesis or promote this hypothesis, Daniel A. Usner Jr., and Vernon James Knight. All of them call this the primary forest efficiency hypothesis. Now, I've already done a video on Native American subsistence methods throughout the Americas and talked about at length in that video the use of controlled burns to promote and control the growth of desired food resources. So I will link that in the guide card. And here are the sources that I got this information from. So real quick, I want to show an example of one of these homesteads in the Middle Woodland period that specialize in a very specific type of craft production. And that is a homestead site known as the Hardin Bridge site that was excavated in a Phase 3 archaeological investigation by New South Associates in 2011, and it is located in or was well still is located in Bartow County, Georgia. And during this investigation, it was determined that the Hardin Bridge site one had a long period of um, uh, utilization of inhabitants dating back to as early as the late Archaic period and as late as the Mississippian period. But during the Middle Woodland period, it was primarily a lithic workshop, i.e., a place that specialized in the production of stone tools. And you can see that in this chapter of this archaeological report by New South Associates, where they discuss that they had found a dense assemblage of lithic artifacts, stone tool artifacts, of more than 250,000 lithic stone tool artifacts. That's quite a lot, and pretty indicative of what this site was used for during the Middle Woodland period. And here's some tables sort of showing the number of those lithic artifacts being found. For example, the number of bifaces, which would often be like spears or knives, as well as the number of debitage, flakes, and shatter and such from the production of stone tools, with the majority of them being made out of very high quality chert, such as the Knox Formation chert from North Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, etc., as well as Fort Payne chert. And here is again a broad overview of what this site was used for. And again, they explicitly talk about how it's most likely that this was a site that specialized in the production of lithic tools, of stone tools, probably for other surrounding Middle Woodland communities, given the sheer amount of lithic artifacts found. In fact, they even argue that the Hardin Bridge site controlled a major chert source in the area. A chert source that I, as an archaeologist, have actually been to, and it is very high quality chert, so it makes sense that they would, the Middle Woodland community that was living here would want to control that chert source. All right. So now this brings us to the next section, what subsistence looked like during the Middle Woodland period. Well, for one thing, animals such as white-tailed deer, wild turkey, and fox were hunted. And this is evidenced by a number of archaeological excavations, such as excavations cited in this paper titled Evidence of Small-Scale Feasting from the Middle Woodland Period Site of Kolomoki, Georgia, by Thomas J. Placon, Matthew Compton, and Mary Teresa Bonage-Freund, published in the Journal of Field Archaeology in 2006. And in this excavation, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, they found a large number of faunal remains, including deer, white-tailed deer, and you can see the number of individuals that they had here and the weight of bones that they found here, as well as other mammals, turkey, etc. And you can see that again here. And during this period of time, the primary tool used to hunt these animals was a tool known as the atlat, which is evidenced by medium-sized projectile points found in archaeological context. Obviously, it would be nice to find the atlatl, the atlat itself. But of course, they were oftentimes made of wood, and wood doesn't preserve very well in the archaeological record. And here are some examples of those points, projectile points that indicate the use of the atlat. As you can see, they're sort of short and medium-sized, if you will, and very round in a lot of ways, which is pretty indicative of atlat points for atlat darts. And the reason I'm saying atlat real quick is, yes, most of the time you'll hear it pronounced atlatl, but atlat is the correct pronunciation because atlat is actually a Nahuatl, indigenous Nahuatl term from Mexico, and the TL is sort of a silent, if you will, specifically, or atlat, or atlat. And here is just a depiction of sort of what hunting with an atlat would have looked like. And then in addition to mammals and birds like deer and wild turkey, aquatic and semi-aquatic animals such as fish, turtles, and sharks would also be exploited. For example, a big mouth bass here, a diamondback terrapin, and I believe this is a mako shark or a black-tipped shark. I'm sure my dad, who's fished sharks before, is watching this and is going to correct me in the comments. But on top of that, in addition to hunting, Middle Woodland period communities in the Southeast also practiced agriculture. They would farm domesticated plants such as corn, tobacco, maygrass, and sunflower. Corn, tobacco, maygrass, sunflower. Corn, tobacco, goosefoot, maygrass, and sunflower. And of course, archaeological evidence has been found and discussed at length for this, as seen in this paper titled Middle Woodland Gardening in the Etowah River Valley in Northwest Georgia, the Hardin Bridge site. Remember, we already talked about the Hardin Bridge site a little bit earlier. Authored by Leslie E. Bronk-Raymer and Mary Teresa Bondage-Freund, published in Early Georgia in 2011. And in this paper, Leslie Bronk-Raymer and Mary Teresa Bondage-Freund discuss both maize agriculture and pre-maize agriculture in the Middle Woodland period Southeastern United States. And you can see sort of that here on this map here, showing the distribution of pre-maize agriculture in the Southeastern United States. And specifically, the plant foods found within the assemblage of the Hardin Bridge site include domesticated plants, as well as wild plants such as goosefoot, knotweed, maygrass, sunflower for the domesticated plants, and in terms of wild plants, blackberry, hickory, oak acorn, pine, etc. And which actually brings us to our next section, because Middle Woodland communities in the Southeast, Middle Woodland period communities in the Southeast, would also harvest wild plants such as hickory nut, acorn, and walnut. And of course, archaeological evidence for this is also found in Leslie Bronk-Raymer's and Mary Teresa Bondage-Freund's paper on Middle Woodland gardening at Hardin Bridge, where they find, as you can see here, examples of hickory and walnut, hazelnut, butternut, acorn shell, etc. And then, of course, going back to the agriculture, they found maize, but in much fairly smaller percentages than any of the other domesticated plants such as maygrass and sunflower. And then tools for agriculture and foraging and other related activities include, but are not limited to, include hoes, for, of course, agriculture, adzes, and axes. And again, as with the points for the outlot and the outlot handles themselves, the handles for hoes, adzes, and axes may not necessarily have looked like these you see here. However, again, wood doesn't preserve well in the archaeological record. So these are the best guesses of archaeologists based off of the examples that are left from living descendant communities, such as, say, the Muskogee Creek or the Cherokee. And again, we can see examples of all these tools that I mentioned at the Hardin Bridge site, as discussed in the report by New South Associates. And you can see the number of these items that were produced by the Hardin Bridge lithic workshop. All right, now this brings us to our next section, large ceremonial sites. So, during the Middle Woodland period, ceremonial mound centers such as Kolomoki, located in Blakely, Georgia, in the coastal plain, and the Leak site, located in Cartersville, Georgia, located in North Georgia in the Appalachian Mountains, would begin to develop. And in terms of small-scale feasting, we return to Thomas J. Placon's, Matthew Compton's, and Mary Teresa Bondage-Freund's paper titled Evidence of Small-Scale Feasting from the Woodland Period site of Kolomoki, Georgia, where in this paper they take a look at all the faunal remains at Kolomoki, all of the botanical remains, i.e., plant remains from both domestic and wild plants. They also looked at the vessel types, the ceramics and the vessel types, specifically how wide their rims were at Kolomoki, as well as the various non-organic artifacts, as well as ecofacts. For those who don't know, ecofact is not a necessarily man-made artifact, obviously, but it is something like, say, pollen or something along that lines that can tell archaeologists what an past environment may have looked like. And after looking at all of these assemblages, and you can pause to read. I'm not going to read the whole thing. But after looking at these assemblages, Placon, Compton, and Bondage-Freund essentially came to the conclusion that all of this was evidence of small-scale feasting conducted by various family groups for political reasons rather than, say, ceremonial reasons, and that were essentially political competitions, and this can be seen by the number of exotic artifacts found within the area, such as mica and Ridge and Valley Chert from the Appalachian Mountains, as well as other ceremonial goods that were also intermixed with domestic goods like domestic pottery, nutting stones, etc. They also point out that the large number of deer within the assemblage, which with deer really making up the majority of the final assemblage, could only have been done via could only have been gathered via communal hunting groups, possibly by family groups working together to gather large amounts of deer to feast on. All right, so now with that, we're going to move on to our next section, Middle Woodland Period art. So one of the most famous types of, among the most famous types of Middle Woodland Period art are the various types of pottery that were produced within the Southeastern United States, with some of the most famous, but not necessarily the only types of pottery that were produced, being Swift Creek complicated stamped pottery, seen here, Cartersville check stamped pottery, seen here, and Weeden Island incensed pottery. And as well as effigy vessels produced, beautiful effigy vessels, I might add, produced at Weeden Island. And you can see all these here. But those weren't the only types of art that existed at the time. Other types of art included carved soapstone pipes, as well as soapstone figurines, hammered copper, say, animal effigies, hammered copper designs, clay figurines, and I would argue the most impressive of these types of art uh, being the carved mica uh, art, carved mica sheets. For those of you who don't know, mica is a very brittle, very thin uh, mineral um, that's very abundant in the Appalachian Mountains. For example, up around where the leak site is in Cartersville, as well as in North Carolina and Tennessee and such. And it is not easy to work with. As an archaeologist, I have picked up occasional, like random, pieces um, of mica and tried to work with it because you can actually peel it off, sort of like they're in sheets, and you sort of peel it off, and it breaks very easily. So, with that in mind, the fact that Middle Woodland communities were able to not only work, not destroy the mica as they were peeling off the sheets, the fact that they were able to carve these beautiful pieces of art, such as this raptor talon, this, say, eagle or hawk talon, out of these sheets of mica is just amazing. There's just no way to put it. And to be able to pick their brains to ask, to pick a Middle Woodland, a person from the Middle Woodland period brain and ask him, how did you do this, would be awesome. So, which actually, these pieces of art uh, brings us actually to our next section, the Hopewell Interaction Sphere. And there's a reason for that. And that's because many of these items, which I've already alluded to a little bit, especially with the mica and like the shark's teeth from the Gulf of Mexico, many of these objects were brought in from very far apart geographic regions. The copper most often came from the Great Lakes region. Galena was very abundant and still is very abundant in areas such as Arkansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, Nebraska, etc. They would get the bear's claws would be traded from as far west as Colorado. Mica and quartz would be traded from North Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, and the Carolinas. And shark's teeth would, of course, be traded from the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico, along with marine shells. And then this is somewhat up for debate to a point. Obsidian would be either traded with communities from, say, Yellowstone in Wyoming, or as some archaeologists have posited, because these obsidian artifacts have not been tested. And yes, you can test stone artifacts for their sources or where they came from, and they have not been tested and matched to Yellowstone. So some archaeologists have argued that perhaps the obsidian, instead of coming from Yellowstone, actually came from Mesoamerica. But either way, that's a massive distance to get obsidian. And it's also, before I move on, important to note while some of this most certainly was done through trade, archaeologists have also pointed out that much of this may have also been done through, say, religious pilgrimage. Um, Again, much of the Middle Woodland period was heavily connected with ceremonial sites like the Ohio Hopewell mounds, the Leak site in Kolomoki. So it's probably a combination of trade and pilgrimages, if you will, religious pilgrimages. And we can see examples of these exotic items from the from the Hopewell Interaction Sphere, again, in the archaeological work conducted by Scott Keith, as he mentions in his chapter, The Woodland Period Cultural Landscape of the Leak Site Complex, where he points out that the archaeological assemblage of the leak site includes exotic items such as sheet copper, likely from the Great Lakes, chert from Ohio, as well as Wyandotte chert, probably from Ohio, as well as a little bit north around the Great Lakes. So, and in addition to, of course, the shark's teeth from the Gulf of Mexico. And then other evidence can be seen in the archaeological work of Thomas J. Blacon, Matthew Compton, Mary Teresa Bondage-Freund in their paper Evidence of Small-Scale Feasting from the Woodland Period site of Kolomoki, Georgia, where they point out that Ridge and Valley chert was found within the assemblage at Kolomoki, despite Kolomoki being located in the southeastern coastal plain of Georgia, Florida, southern Georgia, Florida, and Alabama. And in addition to this, they also found quartz and quartzite, probably from the Appalachian Mountains, as well as mica and limestone. And you can see that again here, the mica and limestone that they found at Kolomoki that would have been likely used for, say, the cutting of these mica sheets that I already mentioned a little bit earlier, and the limestone being used for ceremonial smoking ceremonies. And then more evidence of this, of the Hopewell Interaction Sphere can be seen in the archaeological work of Stephen T. Mokas in his paper titled Recovery of a Con St Vessel in the Middle Ohio River Valley, published in the Journal of Kentucky Archaeology in 2013, where he talks about a Con St vessel found in an archaeological site in Kentucky, at the confluence of the Kentucky and Ohio rivers, and that this Conesti vessel likely came from the Appalachian summit around the border of western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee, and that it was likely traded along some of these potential trade routes that you see here to the confluence of the Kentucky and Ohio River. And more archaeological evidence for this can be for the interaction sphere can be found in the work of Neil J. Wallace and Thomas J. Blacon in their paper titled "Understanding Multi-Sited Early Village Communities of the American Southeast Through Categorical Identities and Relational Connections." Published in the Journal of Anthropological Archaeology in 2023. And in this paper, they are specifically, Wallace and Blacon specifically look at relational connections via shared markers and marks on Swift Creek complicated stamped pottery to look at the various relations between sites, specifically the archaeological sites seen here on this map. And here as well. And as you can see, there is quite a number of connections or trade connections associated with the spread of complicated Swift Creek complicated stamped pottery among these sites, and even further north, which you can also see here in these maps and graphs here. and in this map and this graph here. And then again, more evidence for this interaction sphere can be seen in the work of archaeologists such as Dominique C. Cereso and Neil J. Wallace in their paper titled Understanding Specialization Through Spatial Trends in the Distribution and Style of Weeden Island Effigy Vessels, published in the Florida Anthropologist in 2017. Where they, in this paper, they discuss the archaeological evidence and distribution of Weeden Island effigy vessels, mainly throughout Florida, but as you can see here, also going up into Georgia, such as Kolomoki, and into southern Alabama. And also looking at the total number of Weeden Island effigy vessels at each site. As you can see, for example, Kolomoki, which is in Georgia rather than being in Florida where Weeden Island was developed, has a high number of these effigy vessels. And of course, sites in Florida such as Palmetto Mound also have high numbers of these vessels, which is to be expected. All right. With that in mind, we now move on to the next section that is also connected with the Hopewell Interaction Sphere, and that is ceremonial activities associated with the Middle Woodland Period and the Hopewell Interaction Sphere. For one thing, during the Middle Woodland Period, there is archaeological evidence of the ritual use of lithic artifacts from preceding periods as far back as, say, the Archaic period and even the Paleo-Indian period. And evidence for this is shown in the work, the archaeological work of archaeologists such as Robert J. Austin, as discussed in his paper titled The Ritual Uses of Lithic Raw Materials During the Woodland Period, Fort Center, Southern Florida, published in the Journal of Field Archaeology in 2015. And in this paper, Austin looks at various Middle Woodland mounds at the Fort Center, in Fort Center, Florida, as you can see here on this map here. And in these mounds, he found a large number of Archaic period points, the Archaic period preceding the Middle Woodland period by several hundred years. And these Archaic points were, or at least appear to have been, ritually broken, as you can see on this picture here, and then ritually deposited into these mounds and middens. Midden is an archaeological term for essentially trash pit, a shell pit, etc. And here's some of the graphs showing the percentage of those Archaic points that were ritually broken and deposited into the Middle Woodland mound sites and middens. And here's another example of one of those points that have been ritually broken. After examining these assemblages, Austin goes on to argue that, one, as already alluded to, these Archaic points were ritually broken for ceremonial purposes, and that essentially the ritual breaking of these Archaic points, as well as other exotic materials such as silicified coral, may have been signifiers of status, prestige, or esoteric knowledge. You know, say perhaps even esoteric knowledge associated with, say, ancestor veneration or veneration of spirits or deities. Again, you know, well-made bifaces with ancestral associations may have served as signals of commitment to, or difficult to fake signals of commitment to, larger groups and ideals and goals. So, in essence, the most likely scenario for the ritual breaking of these Archaic points was for ceremonial purposes, likely connected to esoteric knowledge and ancestral associations, ancestor veneration, or some similar activity connected to ancestral spirits. And then we can see more evidence for this interaction sphere in the archaeological work of Alice P. Wright and Erica Loveland in their paper titled Ritualized Craft Production at the Hopewell Periphery, New Evidence from the Appalachian Summit, published in the journal Antiquity in 2015. And in this paper, Wright and Loveland discuss archaeological evidence found at the Appalachian Summit, specifically the Garden Creek site. Where at the site they found artifacts that, specifically mica artifacts, that appear to have been cut and have curved edges, as you can see here and here, left over from being cut. And they point out that while, yes, some of these cut mica artifacts were found in the plow zone and could have been made through farming and agricultural activities in the modern era, by far the majority of them were found in a mica pit, and a feature being something like, say, a hearth or a feasting pit or a religious altar, etc. The majority of the mica artifacts came from one of these features, as you can see here. In addition to this, they also found raw materials that were being produced at this site, raw materials that have been associated with the interaction sphere due to them being exotic, specifically quartz and quartzite lithic artifacts, which you can see here, with quartz artifacts being found, as we already discussed, as far south as Kolomoki in South Georgia, and even further south in Florida. They're rare, but they were still exotic items. In fact, the rarity suggests that they were exotic items. And so evidence for the production of these items can be seen in the quartz flakes here. And no, quartz is not usually not the first go-to for making stone tools. It is very hard to work with. Usually people would want to work with, even in the modern day, want to work with something like chert or obsidian, or jasper or something like that. So the fact that chert was very much present, in fact, high quality chert was very much present in North Carolina, and they were still working with quartz, is a pretty good indication that these chert artifacts were likely being made for ceremonial trade and ceremonial activities. And then they go on to elaborate that these findings contradict beliefs that the Ohio Hopewell would directly procure raw materials that were directly produced by Ohio Hopewell people that were fashioned in the Hopewell core. In fact, suggest that these objects were produced far outside of the Hopewell core. After all, Garden Creek is located far outside of the Hopewell core itself, and with it including debris from both mica and quartz artifact manufacture. So, i.e., this was a site for the manufacture of ritual items, where then would be traded down the line to, say, Ohio Hopewell cultures, and further south to, say, ceremonial centers like Kolomoki. And this is just a further elaboration of their argument for the Garden Creek as a craft production site for ritual items to be traded and dispersed through the Hopewell Interaction Sphere. Still more evidence for this interaction sphere can be found in the archaeological work of Neil J. Wallace et al. In their paper titled Provenance of Weedon Island Sacred and Prestige Vessels, Implications for Specialized Ritual Craft Production, published in the journal Southeastern Archaeology in 2017. Where in this they look at Florida archaeological sites, specifically Palmetto Mound, the mounds at Melton and McKeithen, uh, using neutron activated petrographic analysis to determine the production methods for Weedon Island pottery. Here are the sites that they look at. And here are samples of the pottery that was analyzed with petrographic analysis. After examining all the pottery samples, Wallace et al. Come to a few conclusions. One, they noticed that the production of Weedon Island vessels was neither standardized or highly centralized, yet the vessels were brought in from afar and were greatly valued for burial and other ritual purposes. That being said, well, in addition to this, non-local and local sacred prestige wearers were given equal treatment in these ceremonial practices, which of course begs the question: were artisans specialists? And there is some evidence for this, but to what degree specialization existed is hard to tell. With that in mind, Wallace et al. Posit a few explanations, such as, say, highly specialized individuals, perhaps highly specialized workshops, highly specialized villages, or even highly trained and specialized mobile artisans, any number of these. But again, regardless of this, it is very clear that Weedon Island vessels were highly sought after for ceremonial practices and were distributed and traded all across the region, very far flung parts of the region, as far north as Kolomoki and such. And they point out that clearly the social landscape was integrated by a ritual network that coordinated the production and distribution of pottery. And they go on to, Wallace et al. Goes on to state that vessels and mounds may have derived from multiple geographic origins for a variety of reasons, but all were involved with the movement and close interactions of people across the region. And then Wallace et al. Then goes on to state that analysis of more assemblages and the integration of multiple lines of data will continue to evaluate relationships among pottery production, distribution, rituality, and the possibility of emergent social inequality. All right. So now that we have taken a look at the Hopewell Interaction Sphere within the evidence for it within the southeastern United States and Georgia, it is now time to take a look at our next section after the Middle Woodland Period. So, right around 500 CE, and again, there are some sites that push this up to at least 700 CE. The southeastern United States would begin to transition out of the Middle Woodland Period and into the Late Woodland Period, with the Late Woodland Period lasting between 500 and 1000 CE. And this would happen for a variety of reasons. One, the Hopewell Interaction Sphere appears to have collapsed, possibly with the decline of, possibly in connection to the decline of the Hopewell Center in Ohio. In addition to this, corn would supplant all the other previous agricultural crops, maygrass, sunflower, etc., and would become the dominant agricultural crop in the region. The population within the southeast and in Georgia would continue to rise, and larger villages would become more common. with villages being located in good farming areas. Uh, in addition to this, as I said, the collapse of the interaction sphere may have been connected to the shift of uh, the centers of power from and centers of power, political dominance, and exchange from the Ohio River Valley to the Mississippi River Valley. Essentially, the Hopewell ceremonial center began to decline in influence, and that influence in political dominance, exchange, power, etc., would shift to west to the Mississippi River Valley. Another major change in this period, technology wise, would be the introduction of the bow and arrow, which is evidenced by the production of small triangular points. With because arrows require much smaller points than, say, atlat darts. And again, our best evidence for this are these small triangular points, because wood, like the wood bows were made of, does not preserve well in the archaeological record. Also, in addition to the introduction of the bow and arrow, archaeological evidence shows an increase in warfare with the introduction of the bow and arrow, which is discussed at length by archaeologists such as John H. Blitz in his paper titled "The Adoption of the Bow in Prehistoric North America," published in in the journal North American Archaeologist in 1988, where he talks about that the introduction of the bow gave advantages to groups in intergroup conflict, and allowed for degrees of mobile groups to raid each other in territories of even low density, and also goes on to point out things like, for example, fortified villages begin to appear with designs and layouts of these fortified villages being designed to constrict entrance as in a direct response to bow warfare, among other things such as mobile raiding, and even minor things like increased hunting efficiency. More evidence for this increased warfare can be found in the archaeological work of George R. Milner, discussed in his paper titled "Warfare in Prehistoric and Early Historic Eastern North America," published in the Journal of Archaeological Research in 1999, where, like Blitz, he points out that the bow and arrow allowed for increased hunting efficiency, and the bow and the arrow was well suited to stealth attacks and raids and warfare, allowing for much more efficient raids on rival communities. And then still more evidence for this increased warfare can be seen in the archaeological work of Michael S. Nassy and Kendra Pyle in their paper titled "The Adoption of the Bow and Arrow in Eastern North America, A View from Central Arkansas," published in American Antiquity in 1999, where they specifically look at archaeological sites associated with the Late Woodland Plum Bayou culture, looking at formal production of projectile points, such as the frequency of neck width, frequency of thickness, frequency of weight, frequency of just length in general, projectile point frequency of maximum width. They look at pan-regional comparisons of projectile points and projectile point distributions, and essentially come to generally the same conclusions as Blitz and Milner, that the bow and arrow provided increased efficiency for hunting, and also provided new weaponry for interpersonal violences, and it essentially increased efficiency and mobility of warfare. Uh, Also, during the late woodland period, mound building would become less common. It wouldn't completely stop, but it would at least for a time be less common. And much like the end of the Middle Woodland period, this is variable. There are some parts, some sites associated with the Late Woodland period that saw not only no cessation of or decline of mound building, but actually saw increases in it. But by and large, during the Late Woodland period, mound building seems to become less common across the broad eastern woodland and southeastern region. And then finally, during the Late Woodland period, early forms of elite rulers and chieftains would begin to rise, eventually leading to the reignition of mound building and the rise of major political centers during the Mississippian period from 900, between 900 and the 1600s CE. But this and a much more in-depth video on the Late Woodland period need to be reserved for later videos. All right, so with that, that brings an end to my video. I hope you enjoyed learning about the Middle Woodland period and the cultures that live within it in my home state of Georgia and the Southeastern United States. If you would like me to cover any of the subjects I mentioned in this video in greater detail in later videos, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. And remember to like, share, and subscribe. And I hope you all have a good day.